Remember when I said that the next 20 minutes were about to get even stranger? Well, lo and behold, a statistic started making the rounds recently. According to Circana, only 7 PlayStation games managed to move over 100,000 copies in the United States this year. The online court reached its verdict almost immediately. Physical media is dead. The consumers have spoken. Case closed. Except, before we close this case, there's a significant piece of evidence that is missing. Like, how many PlayStation games actually received physical releases this year alone? Because if we don't have that information, then what exactly does this statistic actually tell us? 7 PlayStation games only managed to sell 100,000 copies. When you actually look at it at face value, it sounds devastating. But then I'll ask you one question. 7 out of what exactly? Is it 7 out of 10? 7 out of 50? 100? Because those are 3 completely different stories. Like, imagine I came up to you and I said, like, for example, let's say you and I are in varsity, and I come up to you and I say, bruh, apparently in that class, only 7 of the students actually managed to pass any subject at all. It's crazy. And I'm like, damn, dude, only 7 people pass this class. How many students are there? And then you look at me and you go, well, I don't know. Well, what you mean you don't know? Like 7 out of how many people are there in total? I don't know, man. I think they're like 10 or something. I'm like, dude, if they're 10, then clearly we have 70% of the classes passing. Like, why don't just say that, you know? That is the vibe that the statistic is actually kind of giving us. It's kind of misleading if you look at it at face value. Because we are given a number without any context to make sense of what it actually means. Now, Circana's statistic might actually be accurate. I'm not arguing that it's false. I'm simply asking whether people are using this number to answer a question that it cannot answer by itself. Before we even conclude that physical media is actually dying, we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, how much opportunity did physical media actually have to succeed in the first place? Because you see, now we're asking almost 2 completely different questions. And if we somehow manage to find the missing denominator, would it actually tell us what consumers actually prefer? Like, look, every physical game sale begins long before someone even buys the game. A publisher first has to decide whether this game will actually receive a physical release or not. Then the discs have to be manufactured and shipped, distributed, stocked by retailers, and of course, kept available long enough for people to actually buy the thing. On the other hand, digital copies don't face that kind of stress. I mean, the supply of digital games is effectively unlimited while they stay listed on the digital storefront of PlayStation Store or something. Physical copies are not. So then, if publishers produce fewer physical games, distribute fewer copies, or just give them less shelf space, then should we really be surprised when fewer physical copies are actually sold? Like, how the hell are you supposed to be able to purchase something that effectively doesn't exist? Madness. Now, I'm not saying that publishers are intentionally trying to destroy or limit physical media or something like that. We don't have evidence for that yet. This simply tells us that physical sales reflect more than demand. They reflect production, distribution, and availability. So, now we have 2 clues. 7 games crossed the threshold. But we still don't necessarily know how many games had the opportunity to cross the threshold to begin with. But let's just grant the strongest version of the argument. Let's assume that physical software sales were really collapsing and that digital, their sales were simply skyrocketing. In 2024, Circana also released an article that reportedly showed that around 82% of lifetime PlayStation 5 sales in the United States were physical disc-capable models. So that would mean that only about 18% were digital at the time. Now, this is where things get really interesting. On one side, we have 82% of buyers who opted for the physical edition. And then on the other hand, we have 7 physical PlayStation games that have moved over 100,000 copies. So how can both these things be true without contradicting each other? It's actually quite simple. You see, buying the disc-based version of the PS5 console doesn't necessarily mean that each every single game that you're going to purchase is going to be physical going forward. I mean, someone can buy most of their games digitally anyway, while still having the disc-based model of the PS5 console. Like personally for me, since I'm in a country whereby we don't exactly have physical media or stores that actually sell physical copies of PlayStation games, I have no choice but to actually buy my games digital. But there could still be a plethora of other reasons. Perhaps maybe some people simply want the ability to be able to borrow their friends, or maybe they want resale value of their game, or they want retail discounts, or maybe they have Blu-ray players at home. I mean, we cannot read the minds of every single buyer and stuff like that, okay? But the hardware data tells us something far more interesting. Most buyers opted for the version that kept physical capability intact or available. People were not necessarily choosing discs for every purchase. They were choosing the option to use one in the first place. And that right there changes the entire argument, because usage isn't the same thing as optionality. Now, of course, physical media isn't perfect by any means. Some modern discs require downloads or patches, or even in some cases, we have online authentication or something like that. But the important thing is that physical media still preserves the choices that the digital media simply cannot. That's why basically saying that most people buy digitally doesn't necessarily just settle the debate like that. I mean, convenience will tell us, or it'll explain to us what people commonly use, but it doesn't necessarily tell us what people actually value. I mean, think about the physical buttons on a TV. Most people use the remote in order to interact with the television screens. They may never even touch the buttons on the television. But the day that remote breaks or you run out of batteries, those buttons on the TV are going to suddenly become super important. The value of the buttons on the TV doesn't come from them being used constantly. It comes from being available when you need it. I mean, this could actually explain why people would choose to buy their games digitally, but still oppose an old digital ecosystem or future. They're not necessarily defending the discs because they use them every day. They're defending the option to choose differently. The real product here is optionality. So, if we step back and we look at what this one statistic actually revealed, publishers decide which games receive physical edition. Manufacturers will determine how many copies will exist, and retailers will influence availability and pricing. And consumers will choose between convenience and flexibility. And Sony will determine what its hardware and software support. And then, of course, the commentators will turn those measurements into sweeping conclusions. So, who knows? Maybe Circana is right. Maybe physical games are disappearing and digital games are basically the future. But I still think that asking the question of, do most people actually buy digital over physical, is still kind of missing the mark or missing the point. The actual thing, or the actual question that should be actually asked here is, just because something is popular, does that then mean that every other competing option has to disappear? And yet somehow I still have a feeling that the next 20 minutes are going to be anything but uneventful.